Hi, everyone. Welcome to Encountering Scripture, a series designed to help you create a personal and intimate understanding of the scripture reading for the upcoming Sunday. This is a 15-minute Bible study that will give you some information and allow you to gain some entry points into the scripture reading for this Sunday. And it's a way for you to really create your own understanding, your own relationship, your own way that you are moved by this scripture reading. So I'm excited to go on this journey with you. And today we're exploring Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 39. Mark 1, 29 through 39. So let's get started by reading the scripture. And I invite you to just follow along and allow what comes to mind to come to mind. Mark writes, "As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with the various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, 'Everyone is searching for you.' He answered, 'Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do.' And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons." Let's begin our journey today by going over the basics of the scripture reading, going over the where we're coming from, who's involved, and when is this taking place. So if you've read leading up to the scripture reading, you'll know that Jesus it was coming from a synagogue in Capernaum where he went and taught, and the people were astounded by how he taught with authority and how he was even able to command unclean spirits to come out of a person that was at the synagogue. They were astounded by that authority. And the last verse leading into our scripture reading today was that Jesus was gaining in popularity around Galilee because of his ability to heal, to exercise, and just the authority that he had. And so Jesus has left the synagogue and is still in Capernaum, but is now arriving at Simon's residence, where Simon's mother-in-law, we would assume, lives. So we don't know if it's Simon's house. We don't know if it's his mother-in-law's house. We don't know whose residence it is, but the scripture says that it belongs to Simon, or at least his family. And so we are there in Simon's residence, and we are also halfway through, or I guess in the last third of the scripture reading, we are in a deserted place. So there's two locations that the scripture reading takes place. It's in Simon's mother-in-law's house, as well as in a deserted place, which we'll get to briefly. When are we? When is this story taking place in the Gospel of Mark? We are still in the very beginning. Chapter 1 gives that away. We are very early in the Gospel, so we want to keep that in mind. And who is who is involved in this story? We already talked about it a little bit. We have Jesus. We have the 4 disciples that he's called so far. Remember, we don't have all 12 yet. We have Simon, we have Andrew, James, and John. Those are the ones he has called. But we have more characters in the story that are important to recognize, because sometimes characters that are not the major characters in the story can give us some very powerful entry points into the scripture reading. So we have Simon's mother-in-law. We have those who are sick and possessed, those who come to the door and wait for Jesus. We also have, we would assume, if they're possessed with demons, and we can even look at the demons as characters in this story. Though they don't speak, though we don't hear from them, they're still a character. So they might allow us an entryway into the scripture that we wouldn't normally think about. So we want to make sure that we know all the characters that are in this story. Even think about some characters that might be in the periphery that aren't mentioned but could be there. Who is at Simon's house? What are the peripheral people there? Does Simon's mother-in-law have people taking care of her? Does she have friends that are there taking care of her while she's sick? Does she have other family members that are there? Really take in and soak in the scripture reading and where these stories take place, and because they can give you some very powerful entry points into the scripture reading. And so those are some of the basics of this scripture that I think are important for us to think about. Now I'd like to dig into the scripture a little bit. This scripture takes place in three parts. You have the first part where Jesus goes to Simon and Andrew's residence. You have the second part where people come to the residence to be healed. And then you have the third part where Jesus is lost to the disciples and they go to find him. We'll get to that briefly. But so let's dig into the first part. This first part, I think it's important to realize, is the first healing that Jesus performs in the Gospel of Mark. Previously, he cast out an unclean spirit, but that was more of a teaching and more of a tool to teach rather than it was a healing. I'm sure the person that had the unclean spirit within him might argue, but scholars consider this to be the first healing in the Gospel of Mark. And I think that's what is revealing about this, is that it takes place in the private residence of Simon and Andrew, but the first person healed is a woman, which scholars have pointed out is a powerful thing, taking on the traditional patriarchy of the church, taking on the fact that Jesus uses women in many of his teachings. I think it's just something to think about when we are still in 2021 having a debate over the role of women in the church. Over and over throughout the Gospels, Jesus uses a woman to proclaim the first good news, Mary, his own mother, to proclaim the good news of Christ. And then when Jesus is resurrected, it's a woman who carries the gospel for the first time since Jesus' death. And over we see women used by Jesus to teach important things. And so this first healing is a woman, which I think is important for us to notice. In the second section, Mark 1:32 through 34, we see a second part of this scripture reading where people are bringing the sick and the possessed to Jesus at Simon and Andrew's residence. So we have, it says, the whole city comes to their door to be healed by Jesus. And the one thing I want us to look at, and it takes place in the next one too, the next section too, is that Jesus his popularity is quickly escalating. We're still in the first chapter, and you see an escalation of his popularity. And one word I think is very revealing that I think is important, especially when we get to the next section, is that it says that Jesus cured many of those who had come to the door. It doesn't say Jesus cured all of them. He cured many. And so for me, if I was looking at that word, which I've been paying attention to that, to me it tells me that Jesus had some sort of boundaries, or there were some sort of boundaries to his healing. So was it because Jesus was being pulled in all these different directions that he wasn't able to get to everyone who was there? Was it that he just couldn't heal everyone? The numbers were too high and he couldn't get there? I wonder if there were some sort of boundaries that Jesus had on how much he could give out versus how much he needed to take in. So we're going to get to that in the next section, but I think the many is a very revealing word that's worth exploring there. And also we notice a difference in who are possessed. We see, last time we saw unclean spirits, this time we see demons. And so the very last sentence says the demons were cast out, but he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. So what does that reveal about Jesus? Why doesn't Jesus want the demons to speak? Because they knew him. I think that's something we can explore. And if you're curious and you want to Google the Messianic secret, I think that's something that you can take on and explore on your own. Google the Messianic secret and see what you come up with there. I think that's something that's worth exploring. Then finally, we arrive to the third section, Mark 1:35 through 39. Mark 1:35 through 39. This is the third and final section in our scripture reading. And it's here that Jesus actually slips the disciples, slips away from the disciples, and they can't find him. They don't know where he is. It says that when it was dark, early in the morning, Jesus got up and went to a deserted place. He went to a deserted place, and there he prayed. So to me, that goes back to the boundaries. I'm interested in exploring that Jesus might have had to fill his cup in order to empty his cup. He couldn't empty his cup fully before he needed to fill up his spirit, fill up his cup, make that connection with God, have that prayer time, that devotion time with God. I think that's something that is worth exploring if that is interesting to you. Also, it says that Simon and his companions hunted for him. So a group of people came out hunting for Jesus because they couldn't find him. They didn't know where he was, which tells me Jesus was well hidden in places they wouldn't know about or wouldn't expect. So the deserted place, maybe they didn't expect Jesus to go to a deserted place. But in Greek, the word hunted they use for hunted is one that means there was an intense search. It's not like they were just looking around in a game of lost and found. It means they underwent an intense search for Jesus when they needed him. And why is that? It's because they said that people were wanting to hear from Jesus. People were searching for him. I imagine that group that was at the door, the many that didn't get to be healed, I imagine they were back ready to be healed again. And so they were looking for Jesus to be healed once more. And Jesus says, let's go to the neighboring towns. So even though his work wasn't done in Capernaum, he said, let's go to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do. And that again is revealing too when Jesus has a mission. Jesus is here for a purpose. He has a mission in his life, and he's letting that mission drive his work. He could have stayed in Capernaum. He could have remained a powerful person in Capernaum. He could have been a popular person in Capernaum, but he decided to leave and to go and to proclaim the gospel in other places around Galilee. So I think that's revealing. So these are the three sections that are a part of our scripture reading today. And I would just invite you to think about what it is about these lessons and these different portions of our scripture, which are very different. There are very different entry points into our scripture reading today. Which one speaks to you the most? I invite you to see which one resonates for you and really explore that one. Don't try to do all of them. Do one thing and explore that piece of the scripture. Go down the rabbit hole, as they say, in exploring where that one entry point takes you. And if you want to do more than one, that's fine. But I think the more specific you get, the more that this scripture might speak to you individually. So I invite you to do that. I also want to invite you to do a practice. And now, throughout the week, as you read this story, I invite you to choose a character in the story and really read the story from their own perspective. So, for instance, if you were going to choose, let's say you choose somebody that's caring for Simon's mother-in-law. Let's say you're a nurse or you're a friend caring for Simon's mother-in-law, and you're sitting on the bed next to her, and you see all of this happening around you. How does that change how you take in the story? Maybe think about your own context as that character. Is this person wealthy? Is this person poor? Is this person have a family? Is this person married? Is this person have kids? Is this person worried about getting sick because they can't afford to be sick and not work for 2 days? What is it? How does when you take the role of a character, how does it change your understanding of the scripture? And I invite you to practice that maybe a couple times with a couple of different characters, but it's another fun way to enter into the scripture reading and get something out of it that you might not usually get out of it by just reading it in our standard or traditional way. So I invite you to do that. I'd like to close this evening by reading from the Message Bible. I've previously been reading from the New Revised Standard Version, but I'm going to read from the Message Bible. And I invite you to just take in the words, allow your spirit to take you wherever it wants to take you. Just let the words, I'm going to have an image up on the screen that will allow you to just maybe take a visual meditation, but just allow the words of the scripture to guide you wherever your mind or your spirit takes you. So here now, Mark chapter 1, verses 29 through 39 from the Message Bible. Directly on leaving the meeting place, they came to Simon and Andrew's house, accompanied by James and John. Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed, burning up with fever. They told Jesus. He went to her, took her hand, and raised her up. No sooner had the fever left than she was up fixing dinner for them. That evening, after the sun was down, they brought sick and evil-afflicted people to him. The whole city lined up at his door. He cured their sick bodies and tormented spirits. Because the demons knew his true identity, he didn't let them say a word. While it was still night, way before dawn, he got up, and he went out to a secluded spot and prayed. Simon and those with him went looking for him. They found him and said, "Everybody's looking for you." Jesus said, "Let's go to the rest of the villages so I can preach there also. This is why I've come." I hope our time together has made you more interested in this scripture reading. I hope that it allows you some entry points to take in and dig into to get a little deeper with this scripture reading. And I hope that you'll find your own understanding, your own interpretation, your own the unique way that the Spirit is talking to you, teaching you through the reading of this scripture. I invite you to join us on Sunday at 10:30 on Facebook and YouTube at Central Christian Church Danbury so that we can worship together, we can read the scripture again together, and we can see a message that God is sending us in this moment. In the meantime, I wish you the best. I'm praying for you, and I hope that you find something deep, meaningful, and important as you encounter this scripture.